everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to play around with a lot of 10-gram mini skeins to create some beautiful colorways. I want to play with a technique where I arrange these mini skeins into a chain to dip dye them, like I did in an episode of Dyebath PS. All of the mini skeins are 10 grams. They are 75% Superwash Merino, 25% Nylon, platinum, either sock or DK from Wool to Dye For. Here I have a 100-gram chain of 10-gram mini skeins, and I've looped them together so that way one is at the bottom and then they are connected together, and the final one is sort of clipped with this zip tie. And this is going to be the yarn that we dip dye today. So we will get one color at one end and a different color, whether we see breaking or just a different level of saturation at the other. This gives a really fun and unique variegated gradient because there are some resist points as you're dipping the weight of the yarn where it's in place that'll create some lighter patches, which I think will be fun. Well, I know it's fun because I've done this before, just with 20-gram mini skeins instead of 10. How did I make this chain? I started off by taking one of the mini skeins, folding it in half, and then folding it in half again. And that is going to be the bottom. Then I take my second mini skein, sort of fold it in half, and then I'll take one end of this and loop it through that first one, and that is our first link of the chain. And so then with each one I will fold it in half, sort of make sure it's equal size, and loop it through. And I'll show this one more time. So I take the full skein, fold it in half, and then loop it through the last chain. And in theory I could do this with as many mini skeins as I wanted. I'm sticking with 10 because it feels like a comfortable length for dip dyeing, but yeah, you could definitely do more. And actually there's no reason why you have to dip dye with this. You could go ahead and hand paint and create something really, really cool as well. Oh, there's so many things that you can do with yarn prep this way, and it's really, really fast. And let's go get set up so we can dye this yarn. And that, my friends, is a lot of chains. I could dip dye the yarn while it was dry, but I decided to pre-soak all of the yarn in some plain tap water at room temperature for about 30 minutes. In my dye pot, I have 16 cups of water, and I am going to add 4 tablespoons or 1/4 cup of white vinegar to set this up. I'm planning on dipping 200 grams of yarn at a time. I just mixed up some 1% stock solution of Dhamra Deep Purple. This is one of my favorite colors. And I am going to add a full cup, which will be about just under 240 milliliters of the color. Which should give us a really, really nice and saturated color overall. Now I need to let this heat up, and then we can start dip dyeing. I popped the skeins through my spin dryer just briefly to remove some of that extra liquid. I also realized that these chains are almost as tall as I am. So if I hold them up by my eyes, they hit like almost at my ankle. So we'll see how this goes. I could double it over if I wanted to, but let's start dip dyeing. And so I'm just slowly bringing it in with a full cup of water. That's about 2.4 grams of dye. And so with the total amount of yarn being 200 grams, it's about a 1.2% DOS, but it's possible that that first purple that's going in could be really, really dark. But we will see as I not only dip, but I'm sort of like waving it in here, so that way we'll still have some resist points maybe not. We should probably still have some resist points, but this will help like get color towards the center of some of these areas. So that's why I am moving it in the pot. But already I'm seeing a lovely gradient here. And honestly, having something so long that I'm dip dyeing, well, it's a little hard. It's a little hard on the arms, but it also just is kind of nice. I love deep purple. I'm not entirely sure if it breaks. There have been some hints at times when like maybe it would, but it isn't always easy to see breaking on, say, a superwash yarn. So at this point, when I raise up, I am not able to lift things out entirely because it is just too tall. But you can see how the yarn that is going in is way more pastel at this point. But it does look like there is a fair amount of color left in our pot. Well, actually, that doesn't look like very much color at all. Let's see if I can lift up everything. So if you look at the pot, like that doesn't look like no color. And if I was just going to drop all of our yarn in here at once right now, you know, it would not stay like white. So here, I'm gonna lower in, oops, this tip. I am using my favorite reusable nylon zip ties because it does make it easier to lift things up. It's like a nice little handle on the yarn, and ooh, you can see some of the like resist in there. It's because the weight of the yarn really does pull it. But ooh, this is pretty. Okay, I think I am going to go ahead and add the whole thing in right now. This is a beautiful deep to light gradient. I don't think I dipped too fast. We really do see that separation in the colors. And so I'm excited. I am going to let all of this yarn sit in the pot for 10 minutes. Whoo-wee, there was a lot more color in here than I expected. Those light colors, whew, are actually fairly deep, and I do see some beautiful resists. And there's no question that we have a gradient here. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and leave this in the pot for, I think, another 10 minutes, just to see if we will absorb more of that color before we move on to the next one. And while we're at it, I'll add another almost 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And actually, I think I might keep the higher acid for the next one, just to see if I can get something a bit more extreme. But I'm just trying to move this around a bit, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, and let's remove our yarn. I'm going to sort of wrap it a bit around these tongs so that way I can lift it out. I'm not sure if we cleared more color in those additional 10 minutes, but it's not bad. So I'm going to set this aside to cool before we can go wash it. As for breaking, there are some warm tone purples and then some cooler, more blue tones in here. It's possible with the right conditions we can get this to break, and this is something that I definitely want to investigate more later, and it's possible that later actually was published. Actually, I think it's probable that the later was published before this video. So you can go watch me try to break this, but I actually filmed that in the future, which is now the past. I decided to reuse the exact same water bath and also add 1 cup of about 240 milliliters of our Deep Purple 1% stock solution. We do have a little bit more vinegar this time, but I think that that could help some of the color strike a little faster. And then I started dipping 200 more grams of these chains. I spin the water out in the spin dryer and then just dipped. I tried to go a bit slower because I wanted to have something that was a little more extreme. But I'm really excited to lay all these out next to each other once they're dry, so that way we can see like proportionally how much dark versus light and like where that midpoint feels color-wise when we look at the yarn. Once all the color was absorbed, I set the yarn aside to cool. I spent about the same amount of time dipping this skein as I did the first round. But I think because there's a bit more acid in here already, maybe we had exhausted some of those colors. But yeah, we'll see when we can lay these out side by side. The lightest color on both the sets looks really pretty similar right now. First set and second set. I think that the acid didn't necessarily make a huge difference, but maybe when we open them up we might see a difference. I think that what made probably a bigger impact is that I did use about the same amount of time of dip dyeing on both of them. So anyway, once they're cool, we can wash them. For comparison's sake, I thought it would be worth dip dyeing a skein of the platinum sock yarn, just 100 grams, a normal circular skein, using the same conditions that we started with for the first time. So I have 16 cups of water, 4 tablespoons of white vinegar, but I'm going to add an amount of dye that's proportional to what I did on our chains. I am adding 1/2 cup, which is 118 milliliters, and so it'll give the same total amount of dye on our yarn. I also pre-soaked that yarn for about 30 minutes, and you know, once this heats up, then we'll start dip dyeing. Here we go. We are below a boil, and let's just start dip dyeing. Once again, I did put my yarn through the spin dryer, so that way it's damp, so it goes easily into the water, but it is definitely not saturated. So at the beginning, I was sort of like move it around a little bit, and you can even take your tongs to help move it around, so that way you're not just getting dye on the outside of the skein, it goes to the fibers a little more on the inside. And each time I just go a little further and further in. Now normally if I'm dip dyeing one skein, I like to start with about 8 cups of water. And so, yeah, so this is a bigger volume of water, which can also slow down the rate that the colors will absorb. But you can see I'm just hanging out on this darkest edge a bit, and then slowly adding more color. But dip dyeing is fun. I still don't have as good of a feel for acid dyes as I do for, say, food coloring, where I know, like, okay, you have to go pretty fast, and at this point, this is when you add, like, all the yarn to get, like, all the color on. But I do know that here in this pot we have a lot of color. And so you can kind of see where there's colors going as you go deeper and deeper. And so that's looking rather pale, but there's still a ton of color in there. So if I was going to put this all in right now, then we would see just a lot. The lightest end would get fairly dark. And so I'm going to actually do something that is not standard for when I'm dip dyeing yarn. But at this point, I'm adding another 1/4 cup of vinegar to help speed up the speed with which things are striking to our yarn. But actually, you know, and like even now if I go in with the end, like I think almost no pigment went on that lightest part. But that's not to say that there's no pigment in the bath. There is absolutely still pigment in here. You can use the tongs to help make sure you get color coverage. So this is hot, and the yarn obviously that I'm dealing with today is a superwash colorway, which means that we're not going to, that's not going to felt as easily as say a non-superwash wool, where you would want to be more careful. And so that is starting to look a little more pale, but I'm not sure if some of this color starts to like come out and bleed a little bit. So there's different things that I could do here. If I wanted to keep this end a little near white but still have it be saturated and have the rest of the yarn have more time in there, I could set something up so that way it is not completely submerged. But I think instead I can just continue to be here slowly, and I would like it to get a little bit of color, and so make sure that it can move around a bit so it gets access to color. You can see that we are clearing, and I'm going to go ahead at this stage and put the rest in. We should have a really nice difference in tone, even if that light edge does pick up a lot more color. I'm going to reduce the heat to low and leave the yarn in here for 10 minutes when we'll come and check on it. Okay, after 10 minutes, it's great, and we've got a nice pastel. This is more pastel than what I got on the more chained things, and I'm really happy. I'm going to leave this another 10 minutes, then we'll remove it. The 10 minutes are up. I'm going to turn off the heat and remove our yarn. The color has really well absorbed, and I think we still ended up with a little more of a pastel at that end, but I'm going to let this one cool and wash it off camera, but I'll show it to you at the conclusions. Let's wash our yarn. I'm not expecting there to be a lot of bleeding, but you never know. I am going to wait until the yarn is dry to open them up to do a reveal. It's a nice way to keep things organized, and they didn't end up being super crimped the last time that I did this. I'm going to add a little bit of dish soap. I don't know why I'm wearing my gloves right now. I frequently don't at this stage because there's so little dye left, but I am still going to go dye the DK like this, so there's that. But yeah, that is looking really good. I'm going to let this soak in the soapy water for a tiny bit and then rinse out the soap, put the yarn through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. You guys, I goofed. After keeping the first set and the second set of dip dyed skeins separate on my drying rack, when I brought everything downstairs to film these in conclusions, I mixed up the two sets. So one of these was set 1, one was set 2. Ultimately, the final colors look the same, the deepest colors look the same. The gradient is just slightly different, whereas maybe the deeper colors go a little higher on this set. So maybe this was the second set with more vinegar, but I don't know. I think both of them actually feel pretty nicely balanced, and I'm really excited to see how they look once we open them up. I grabbed one from each batch of fingering and one of the DK for me to open up. Let's start with this one. And as I pull it out, you can see we do have some paler, it's almost a dusty blue. That is our resist color. And so far, the second one seems to have a bit more warmth there. Okay, it looks like our little resist points are getting a little more blue. I think that if I was able to withhold putting the whole thing in for a little longer, maybe we would see a lot more of the blue at the end. I definitely feel the breaking here, but we will want to explore that more in the future. Okay. Oh, that's the wrong end. I was like, why can't I undo it? Okay. I like these sort of resist pops of color that we're seeing on here. Yeah, there's definitely a bit more of that blue tone as we go towards the end. But ooh, the second to deepest color has only a very pale spot. And here, uh-oh. Okay. Here in our first skein that went in, you get almost some evidence of that breaking because you see the more like eggplant, deeper purple, and something that feels a lot more blue, but still has a purple there in the middle. Unraveling the second set felt very similar, as it should have, to the first. I didn't see any real extreme noticeable differences, so ultimately I think that the difference in the vinegar concentration did not make a huge difference in today's case. Yeah, I would say that these two gradients feel mega similar. There's those pops of pale blue. At the very end, there's not a lot of pops. I like that the resist points get paler and paler as the purples turn a little more blue and a little less saturated. I think it's beautiful, and either of these would turn into some really fun socks or a shawl or something awesome. I still have to open up one of the DK chains, but first I'm going to go and twist these up so that way I do not mess it up. The gradients are so cute, and those pops from the resist will give it a really fun, variegated feel. Now, depending on your gauge and everything, you could get some pooling because these pops, the resist points are repeating, but that could be fun, or, I mean, in all likelihood, it's so small that they'll probably be fairly spread out. But I just love this. In this video, we didn't so much do a leaf node dye behind as we did, okay, we dip dyed on this chain of mini skeins. Let's also dip dye a full 100-gram skein of yarn. And here we were definitely able to capture more of those pastel colors. I think, and in the center we got a little bit more blue, but because I think we spent so much more time dip dyeing the chain of chains, I'm not sure if that's why we saw more blue. And of course now I'm forgetting the different acid concentrations, but I don't feel as much of the breaking here as I did on our chain of chains. And I still definitely want to explore this color and breaking more in the future. The breaking on the 100-gram skein reminds me a little bit of when I dip dyed to break grape Kool-Aid, where on 100% wool you could capture a little bit of those blues at the end, and you got almost a cool tone white that removed some of the warmth from the off-white bare yarn at the end. And so there's that similar feeling where I can tell myself that there's probably some breaking going on, but it's super subtle. When I unraveled the DK weight chain, the colors and the progression felt very similar to the fingering weight. I wasn't sure if it would be any different because since it's a thicker yarn, sometimes there's a surface area volume difference when it comes to things like this and breaking, but yeah, I'm just as in love with this colorway on the DK as I am on the fingering weight. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode of the 2019 ChemKnits Chanukah special. I love how much this almost feels a tiny bit like a dip dyed broken violet, and I still have to try dip dyeing a chain of chains like this into some Wilton's Violet food coloring to see how we do with breaking when it comes to that. But this does, the colorway here reminds me a little bit of our summer Miniskein mini-series, a Die Cut Weekly episode from back in there. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, turn on notifications, and if you're already a subscriber and have been a fan for a while, you should really go and check out the ChemKnits Patreon. I offer cool perks like shoutouts and videos, behind the scenes sneak peeks, advance notice of shop restocks, and more. You can find a link to the Patreon in both the video description and iCard. Don't forget to go and check out the ChemKnits Chanukah playlist so that way you can catch up on the episodes that you might have missed from this week. But I'm honestly having such a blast dyeing and designing these colorways for you to enjoy these episodes at home each night, whether or not you're unwrapping one of the Miniskeins from the samplers. If you make something out of your Miniskeins, please share pictures on social media with the hashtag ChemKnitsChanukah, and that way everyone can go and see it and check it out. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.